should help me, that I should live long and I should be healthy. I should be able to learn more Torah. I should be able to be mechadash muchadash from Torah. The topic is Nasa v'Nishma, and we're doing very little reading and a lot of talking because there's not much to read. We're having a very time collecting source material for the topic of Nasa v'Nishma, which itself I find fascinating. That the Rebbe's Torah, it's hard to find in a Siche a comprehensive analysis of Nasa v'Nishma. Now, the ultimate Naseh is complete submission to Hashem. The total submission to Hashem. It's the ultimate Naseh. How much submission to Hashem that you don't even have to know what He's going to tell you. Right? As the Gemara says, Amma Peziza, a nation of hasty ones, of rushing ones. You put your mouth ahead of your ears, but you committed to something before you know what it was that you were committing to. But Nasa is not enough. You have to have Nishma also. And there's a lot of different Nishmas, right? One of the Nishmas is to do it. You have to push it, do it. Committing to the king is nice, but the sign, the measure of the health, the integrity of that commitment is that you actually do what the king says to do. Like you have in this week's Chitas. That Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Aaron to light the menorah, so the apostle says that Aaron did it. So Rashi says, this is the praise of Aaron HaKohen. The praise of Aaron HaKohen, that he didn't change what he was told. So the Rebbe says, really? That's the praise of Aaron HaKohen? He gets a direct instruction from Moshe Rabbeinu that gets those instructions directly from the Eibishter. And Aaron's Shevach is, Aaron's greatness is that he does what he's told. That's the greatness of Aaron HaKohen. And the Rebbe answered that you could imagine yourself what kind of enjoyment and what kind of passion and what kind of neshama Aaron invested in lighting the menorah when you hear instructions directly from Moshe Rabbeinu that come directly from the Eibishter. So therefore the shevach is that even though Aaron did this mitzvah, he did it with great passion and great excitement and great pleasure and great joy and great kavanah. He did it the way he was told. The Maaseh Bepoil, the Nasa was precise. So last week's class, amongst other things, we talked about the idea how the Nishma bears out the Nasa. But the last level of this, of Nasa being born out by Nishma, pardon me, thank you. If you were here last week, was that the Nishma means I'm going to understand. Why? Because the understanding of the brain is always seen as the opposite of Bittul and Kabbalah Seil. The mind has to do with the ego, with the self, with subjectivity, with your point of view. And the whole concept of Bittul is that you allow the Eibishter's will to take over yours and all of that. You lose your will. The ultimate nishma is that you accept the Eibishter's will, and He gave it, including the will that we're supposed to try and understand. In other words, the understanding is not me. The understanding is not satisfying and fulfilling me. The understanding is a part of the Naseh. Hashem wants that I should accept Him. Hashem wants that because I accept Him, I do everything He says. And Hashem wants that I should accept Him and do everything He says and try my best to understand it. In the language of the Rambam, Kol dover she'ef she'losses leitam, tein leitam. Whatever you can give a reason to, you should give a reason to. Even though, time ya mitzvahs leinis galsu, the save time on shal mitzvahs, the real reason for mitzvahs, we don't know. You should do mitzvahs on that madrega. So when the understanding comes after the Kabbalah Seil, the understanding is not taking away from the Kabbalah Seil, it's making it more whole. So the ultimate nishma is that I committed to the Eibishter so much that I'm even going to understand this mitzvah. I don't know if I told you the story last week, but it's a really wonderful story. There's a volume, it's been translated into English, I think it's a very special book. I think it's a special book because it's a special window into Chabad. It's called Avnei Chaim. Avnei Chaim means the stones of the family of Chaim. In my opinion is, take it or leave it, after Shneisen, in Chabad, after Shneisen comes Chaim. I don't think there's a close second. The Chaim family is one of the largest Chabad mishpachas, have produced some of the most gigantic, the greatest chassidim from all the generations, and to this day they're a large family, which means that the Holocaust did not decimate them, the Holocaust did not destroy them, and the Holocaust did not decimate and destroy their identity. I have a daughter who was a shliach in New Haven, and an Israeli couple showed up in New Haven to do work for Israel, Sochnut. She, from home, is a Chaim. She's not from at all, and she gives my daughter, a very hard time. And then one of the things she says to my daughter is, you don't know what Chabad is, I know what Chabad is, and I'll tell you. Because she has ancestors, they go back, mamish till the Alter Rebbe. It's a very, very robust family of Gedolei Yisrael. Big chassidim, groise chassidim. And one of the trademarks of the Chaim Mishpacha is they're extremely confident. They have no problem with self-esteem. So in a breite mensch, you have chassidim, that by them the bittel means that they're like sheep. The Chaims were big chassidim, but they were powerful men, powerful people, powerful men and powerful women. So there's a very fascinating story. In this extremely illustrious family, one of the most significant members is a chassid by the name of Reb Peretz Chaim. He was the Rav of Nevel, then later he was the Rav in Babroiskat, he was Rav in Chernihiv, which was a big city, Chernihiv. He's that chassid, you may have heard, who actually saw 6 of 7 Rebbes. He was about 17 years old when the Alter Rebbe passed away, and he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe when he was 2. He saw the Frierdiker Rebbe when the Frierdiker Rebbe was 2 years old. He saw 6 Rebbes. He was born in 1797, and he passed away in the 1880s. I mean, he didn't live 150 years, but he saw 6 Rebbes, Bepoil. And he was a chassid at least of 4 of them. He probably was also connected to the Rebbe Rashab. I don't know how much of a chassid he was, but he was a chassid of the Rebbe Marash as well. He was a very big chassid, a big Rav, he was a big Gon, he was a big Oivid, he was a big chassid, he was a giant of a man. So one of the interesting stories, he was one of the Hasidim who was instrumental in getting the Tzemach Tzedek to agree to be Rebbe. I don't know if you know it, but the Tzemach Tzedek did not want to be Rebbe right away. And it's gerade connected to this time of year. His father-in-law, the Middle Rebbe, passed away in Kislev, which is in the winter, November. And Tzemach Tzedek's Kabbalah Sanasiyas happened in steps. The first step was Shavuos. And the final step was Ba'alaischa. This week is Ba'alaischa Tov Kuf Tzad Gimel, which was 4 years and a half after his father-in-law passed away. A lot of the biggest Hasidim came to Lubavitch, and it was, so to speak, the end of the crowning of the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. This, they used to call it Shabbos Pnimi Yatzmi. Pashat Ba'aloischa Tov Kuf Tzad Gimel. It was 3.5 years, or 4.5 years, 3.5 years. I don't know how to count. After the Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe unofficially, and then it happened slowly. The Peretz was one of those Hasidim who was very involved in getting the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, to be a Rebbe. So the story goes that the Tzemach Tzedek complained. The third Lubavitcher Rebbe was a very big tzaddik and a very big Ovid Elokim, but also was a very big Goan and Nigli. He loved to learn. And the Tzemach Tzedek complained that since he became a Rebbe, nobody wants to talk to him. Because to talk and learning, you have to find an equal, or at least a relative equal, and then you have to spar. You have to say your opinion, you know. But he's a Rebbe, he's a sacred cow. Nobody wants to go near him. So the Tzemach Tzedek complained that the biggest Chassidim were the Tzemach Tzedek, who were Gedolei Adad. They were big Goinim. Some of these people knew the whole Torah, like you know how many fingers you have, but they wouldn't talk to the Rebbe. So either the Tzemach Tzedek told the Peretz, or the Peretz heard from the secretary. So the Peretz Chaim says, the Rebbe wants to talk and learning? I'll talk and learning. And that's what he did. He went to the Tzemach Tzedek and he argued with him. Why? If this is what the Rebbe wants. That story is in this book, Avnei Chaim. I think it's a good read. I think it's worthwhile reading. Because it's a window into many generations of Chabad. The first Chaims were by the Alter Rebbe. I mean, the last Chaims are Baruch Hashem alive and well today, but even by the Rebbe Rashab, There was a Mendelchain. They were gigantic. And by the way, for those who do not know, that in Lubavitch is also a family Lane. Lane, a last name Lane, L-A-I-N, and some of the Raskins are also Lanes. Lane and Chain is the same family. They just changed the name because of the draft, the Priziv. So it's, if you've been around Lubavitch, you know many people who are branches from the tree of Chain. It's a very illustrious family. The Rebbetzin once told somebody, if you marry into this family, you're in the very hub of Chabad, you're in the center of Chabad. Anyway, so what's the pshat? The Petz Chaim was a chassid. He really was a chassid. And whatever the Tzemach Tzedek would tell him to do, he would do. He served. He was a chassid. But if the Rebbe wants I should argue with him, I'll do that too. If that's what you need to do, that's what I'll do. In other words, his bittul was to the extent that if bittul means he should tell the Rebbe whether he disagrees in learning, it's also part of the bittul. And that's the ultimate nishma. The ultimate nishma means that not only do I bear out the nasa, I submit to the Eibishter. And my submission to the Eibishter translates into doing what he tells me to do. And nothing is too small. But included in that nishma, that I should also understand the Torah and give meaning to the mitzvahs, because this is what the Eibishter wants. Like it says in Tanya chapter 38, that doing a mitzvah with a kavanah is also a mitzvah because he wants us to have the kavanah. So it goes like full circle. You know, the beginning of Nasa v'Nishma is I want to understand. The end of Nasa v'Nishma means the Eibishter wants me to understand, so I'll be able to do that also, have kavanah as well. And I want to tie this in. I have notes here from last week's class. I want to tie this in to one more point, and then we're going to go back to the text of the Siyach. And that one more point is, and it's come up before in these classes, that we all know that there are mitzvahs that are called chukim, and there are mitzvahs that are called mishpatim. Or more specifically, there's mitzvahs that are called edus, and mitzvahs that are called mishpatim, and edus that are mitzvahs that are called chukim. Right? You're familiar with this, correct? Mitzvahs that don't make any sense at all, mitzvahs that make complete sense, and mitzvahs that only make sense if you know the context of Torah and the Jewish history. Like Shabbos and Yom Tov, they're edus. In the early Rishonim, in the earlier thinkers, there's no three, there's only two. And again, I've talked about all of this. Mitzvah sichliyes and mitzvahs shemiyes. Sichliyes means mitzvahs that make sense, and shemiyes, from the word mashma'ut, means mitzvahs that you do with siyus, with discipline, with self-control, with submission. Hashem tells you do it. So when the Rambam talks about mitzvahs sichliyes and mitzvahs shemiyes, when the Rambam talks about logical mitzvahs and mitzvahs that are not logical, the Rambam says when you do a mitzvah that doesn't have a reason, you should do it with as much enthusiasm as a mitzvah that does have reason. That's how the Rambam looks at it. Because the Rambam is a Baal Seichel, at least that's how he wrote. He's a philosopher. And the Rambam's thinking, the greatest thing is the human mind and the human understanding. So the Rambam writes, a mitzvah you understand, obviously you're going to be able to do better than a mitzvah that you don't understand because you know the meaning behind it. Even a mitzvah that you don't understand, you should do with the same enthusiasm that you do a mitzvah that you do understand. That's the Rambam's angle. But Chassidus is exactly the opposite angle. That a mitzvah that you do understand, you should do with the same submission as a mitzvah which you don't understand. Not that you should do chukim like mishpatim, but you do mishpatim like chukim. Right? This is how the Chassidus goes. That it says in the Chumash that Hashem came down on a mountain and He gave us the Aseres HaDibros. And then the Eibishter went away. And the rest of the Torah the Yidden didn't get from the Eibishter directly, they got from the Torah through Moshe Rabbeinu. So the next Pasha, right after the giving of the Torah, begins with the words, Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tosim lifneiam. These are the mitzvahs that you should place in front of the Jewish people. Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tosim. These are the judgments that you should place in front of the Jewish people. And there's a Vov in the beginning of that Pasha, which connects Pashas Mishpatim to Pashas Yisrei. So Rashi says, Ma harishayim misinai afeilu misinai. Just like the Ten Commandments we got from the Eibishter at Sinai, all of the mitzvahs we're going to read in this week's Pasha, we also got from the Eibishter at Sinai. Now, Mishpatim means mitzvah sichlius. The meaning of the word Mishpatim means mitzvahs that we're able to understand. So Chassidus says, that when you're doing a mitzvah like don't steal, Do not do it because stealing feels wrong to you. Do not do it because the Eibishter said. We're doing a mitzvah like don't murder. Do not do it because murder seems wrong to you. Do it because the Eibishter said. Why? Because Chassidus holds that in Nasa, in our submission to the Eibishter, there's more integrity than in understanding. So the Rambam says, a mitzvah which doesn't make sense, do like a mitzvah that does make sense. And Chassidus says, no, a mitzvah that does make sense, don't do it based on its logic, do it based on the fact that the Eibishter said, I'm going to assume that you're writing material content to this class. I'm sorry for asking. So listen. Yes, so listen. I'm learning Gemara with a young man. I have a chavrusi every day. I'm learning Masechtas Sanhedrin. And one of the things that we're learning about is Shlomo HaMelech. And it comes out from the Gemara. Shlomo HaMelech made mistakes. Big mistakes. I always tell people that Shlomo HaMelech and David HaMelech are not the same level at all. They're not. The Gemara says David HaMelech's Averis were not Averis. But the Gemara doesn't say that about Shlomo. Shlomo was extremely gifted. He was extremely powerful, extremely great. Three of the 24 Sfarim of Tanakh are his. Officially. Mishlei, Shir, Hashirim, and Kehelas, which is amazing. Moreover, the Gemara says, Kol HaSfarim Keidesh, Shir, Hashirim, Keidesh, Kadoshim. If all the books of the Tanakh are holy, the Song of Songs, which King Solomon wrote, is the Holy of Holies. So Shlomo HaMelech. But when you read the Tanakh and you read the Chazal, Shlomo HaMelech's ego got the better of him. Shlomo HaMelech made mistakes. And the mistakes that Shlomo HaMelech made ultimately brought about the Churban in the first place. Shlomo HaMelech made big mistakes. And the Jewish people paid for those mistakes. I learned the Gemara yesterday that when he became a king, he was ruled over the whole world. Then he ruled over the whole of the Jewish people. Then he ruled over Yerushalayim. Then he ruled over his bed. And then he ruled over his walking stick. He lost it all. Then the Gemara asked, did he get it back at the end of his life? Yes or no? And the Gemara brings two opinions. Shlomo lost it because he trusted himself too much. There's an expression in English. Absolute power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Shlomo HaMelech had absolute power. Now we're not going to say Shlomo HaMelech corrupted absolutely. He built the first Beis Hamikdash, and he v'cholu. But he made mistakes, big ones. And one of the mistakes that he made that the Gemara talks about is that he trusted his own mind. He used to say mitzvahs have reasons, and if you know the reason for the mitzvah, you don't necessarily have to keep it if you can protect yourself from what the mitzvah is trying to protect yourself. For example, a king is not allowed to have too much money. A king is not allowed to have too many horses. A king is not allowed to have too many wives. Because we're afraid that they're going to preoccupy him with bad things, they're going to take him away to the wrong direction. Shlomo said, you know what, I'll have 1,000 wives, it's not going to hurt me because I'm Shlomo HaMelech. And they did schlep him down. Yosel Levavi. And the same is true with too many horses, and the same is true with too much wealth. Shlomo HaMelech trusted his own mind, and there was a lot to trust. He had an incredible mind. Shlomo HaMelech is considered Chacham Mikol Adam, the wisest man who ever lived. When the Rambam wants to describe how great Mashiach is, he says he's going to be smarter than Shlomo. Not smarter than Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Bepashas Moshe was much smarter than Shlomo. It's a different kind of Chachma. Shlomo HaMelech is considered the smartest man who ever lived, and it became an issue for him. Because he said, if you're as smart as I am, you don't have to have Nasa. And everybody needs Nasa. The way the Eibishter made the Torah, there's no exceptions. And one of the rules of Torah to which there are no exceptions, not even King Solomon, is the rule of Nasa before Nishma. When a Yid lives as a Yid lives, the most important thing is to submit to the Eibishter without reason. When a Yid lives as a Yid, what's most important is that what his commitment to the Eibishter translates into doing what Hashem says we must do and not doing what Hashem says we mustn't do. Now, we can later re-engage our mind, or perhaps even not only we may, but we should. The Rebbe says if you learn Torah and you don't enjoy it, you didn't understand the mitzvah. You're supposed to understand the Torah. You're supposed to enjoy the Torah. Or to say it in America, you're supposed to agree with the Torah. But first, Naseh. First, this is true. And this is true means that the reasoning that I'm applying to the mitzvah is only enhancing the truth. It's not diminishing the truth. If you approach it from a different angle, you could fall as Shlomo HaMelech fell. So the ultimate Nasa v'nishma is at the end of my Kabbalah Seilas that I engage my mind also. I have to understand every mitzvah. I have to understand every word of Torah. But you know why? Because the Eibush said I should. That's why. Because Hashem said I must. So that becomes a part of the Nasa. Does anybody wish to comment or speak?
Why does Hashem say that we need to have fun with it?
Nishma.
The Nishma?
The Rebbe in the Sichos, the Rebbe in his Maimorim talks about the pleasure of learning Torah, and it contradicts a lot of the Chabad tradition. You know, the Rebbe says if you don't enjoy the Torah, you didn't learn it, you were Makab the mitzvah. What about Bittel and Kabbalah Seil? It's an expression. You know, a Chassid goes into his Rebbe and he argues with his Rebbe. Why? Because the Rebbe wants to argue with somebody.
Say that again?
A Chassid argues with his Rebbe because the Rebbe wants him to argue with him. So the argument with the Rebbe is part of serving the Rebbe. The story with the Peretz Chetz is a fascinating story. The Rebbe said, I want to talk and learning. Everybody gets a chance to talk and learn with others. I'm also a Talmud Chacham. I want to have a conversation with a Talmud Chacham who could spar with me, Shaveh b'Shaveh. Nobody wanted to do it, so he said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. If that's what the Rebbe needs, that's what we'll do. And that's what he did. Questions or comments? So I'm going to break very quickly. We're going to make this class, the first class will be shorter, the second class will be longer, okay? Let's read the end of page 221 and 222, okay? You see where I am? Do you have your copy? You know, I actually walked in today and said I forgot your name, and then they reminded me your name is Anili.
That's not what he said.
Okay, this is my original, lady. Because I don't know what happened to your copy. I know what happened to your copy. I gave it to her. Okay, let's go.
It's okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry.
She doesn't mean it. When she says don't worry, she doesn't mean it. Let's go. Hagdamas Nasa Lenishma, 221, second column, left, second half of the page. Only the underline. That's how we do this. Only the underline. Hagdamas Nasa Lenishma.
Wait, 22?
221, first page.
221, second column.
Second half of the column. Hagdamas Nasa Lenishma, saying Nasa before Nishma, which we've exhausted now for, I think, 10 classes. He's in 10 classes on these lines. You tell me how we did that. Yashna Gam Balimud Atera Gufa exists within learning Torah itself. In other words, there's Nasa v'Nishma in learning Torah. How was that? Biyachas lechelek hamaisa shebetera, as it relates to the part of the Torah which is connected to action, which is halacha psuka lemaisa lepeil, the law which is fixed, that's actionable and actual. There's such a thing called Shulchan Aruch, and you should know that Rebbe, our Rebbe, all the years would complain that today in yeshivas the bachram are busy learning Lamdas. Day and night they learn Gemara. And a lot of people who in other ways are very big Talmidei Chachamim, when it comes to halacha, how do you push it? How do you put on film? How do you daven? They don't know Shulchan Aruch. And the Rebbe held that learning halacha is axiomatic. It's very, very, very important. There's a sikha from the Rebbe, Yud Shvat Sikha, which I taught here 20 years ago, maybe, or more, where the Rebbe speaks about 3 chidushim in the Friedrich Rebbe. One of them is the chinuch of children. Another one is probably outreach, but I don't remember. And the third one is learning halacha. The Rebbe wanted people to know dinim, what to do. Now halacha is boring. Yimad is a lot more interesting than halacha. But halacha is much more important, because halacha is the basis for being frum. What we call in our culture yirat shamayim, fear of heaven, fear of God. Being frum is serious. And to be frum, you have to know what to do. And to know what to do, you have to learn halacha. So sometimes you have to close the Gemara, even though the Gemara is so enjoyable, and open up the Shulchan Aruch, or even the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abbreviated Shulchan Aruch, to know what to do b'maisa lepeil, because it's what the Eibishter wants. Let's read it. Studying Jewish law is a decline, is a descent, is a diminution, is a compromise of a learning halakhic theory. When one is studying just the book of laws that tells me what to do and what not to do, you don't feel the length and the breadth and the depth, which is in the dialogue of Torah. Torah is a discussion. And it's an argument between people who are trying to interpret the psukim and to flush out what the din is. And when you're studying Gemara, you see all of that. You see the different opinions. I'm going to say something just as an aside. There is a sefer which is most unusual. It's a sefer of halacha, and it brings every opinion. It's like a combination. The sefer of halacha that doesn't just say halacha. It's called the Tur, the Beis Yosef. I'm sorry, the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef wrote the Shulchan Aruch. You know that, right?
Yeah.
But before the Beis Yosef wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and when we talk about the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, we both Sfardim and Ashkenazim called the Beis Yosef Moron. Mem Reish Nun, our master, our teacher. The Beis Yosef is called Moron. All the B'dei Achreinim, even Ashkenazim, and Beis Yosef was a Sfardi, called the Beis Yosef Moron, our master. He's Moron, he's our master when it comes to the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is just rules, very, very cryptic, very short, 1 second. But before the Beis Rivka wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which was written before his, which is called the Tur, written by the Balatur, the son of the Rosh, a couple hundred years before the Beis Yosef. And his book is called Beis Yosef, the house of Yosef. His name was Yosef Kara, Beis Yosef. And the Sefer Beis Yosef, his pen was special. He's very easy to read. Some rabbis, they write so heavy, it's hard to know what they're talking about. The Beis Yosef is very, very easy to read. He has a commentary on the Rambam called Kesef Mishnah and a commentary on the Torah called Beis Yosef. He's very easy to read. But in the Sefer Beis Yosef, in stark contrast to the Shulchan Aruch, where he's called Maran, he brings every opinion. So in every halakha, have a whole page, Rabbi Megillah, all the different opinions. And just to keep track of it all, and he quotes them. It's written in longhand. He writes out in each halakha all of the background. Beis Yosef is a lot more fun than Maran. Learning the Sefer Beis Yosef is a lot more fun than learning Shulchan Aruch. But when you learn the Beis Yosef, you know all the opinions, but you don't know what to do. When you learn the Shulchan Aruch, you may not know the opinion, but at least you know what the law is. So real Lomdim learn Torah with Beis Yosef. Real scholars who are learning halacha, before they learn the Shulchan Aruch, learn the Torah with the Beis Yosef. They learn the earlier Shulchan Aruch. It's a little bit of a complicated story, and I don't want to delve into it at length, right? But there are two styles of Shulchan Aruch. There's the earlier style of Shulchan Aruch and the later style of Shulchan Aruch. The earlier style of Shulchan Aruch means you wrote the halachas on the Gemara. The Gemara brings a whole discussion, you write what the law is. The Rif is like that, the Rosh is like that, and a lot of the Goinim are like that. But then there's another order where you rewrite the Shulchan Aruch in an orderly fashion, where you know where to find things because it's written in a systematic way. And the father of that model is our best friend. Who's our best friend? The Rambam. The Rambam restructured halacha. And they held it against him. Because all the other poskim used to write their halachas on the page of the Gemara. So if you're not sure what the halacha is, you can look at the Gemara. The Rambam took it away from the Gemara, made it into his own book, which is extremely concise and extremely crisp. But if you're not certain what the Rambam holds, it's very hard to find his source. And if it's very hard to find its source, it's hard to address the variables. If you have a different shaila there, he doesn't bring out explicitly what would the halacha be in that case. Which is why the Rosh holds you're not allowed to paskin halachas from the Rambam. And we're Ashkenazi. The Rosh was an Ashkenazi. The Rambam was a Sfardi. And we paskin like the Rosh, you're not allowed to paskin from Rambam for this reason. Because you cannot paskin halacha, a book of halachas, unless you know the sources. The timing halachas. So after the Rambam came the Tur. The Tur was a couple hundred years after, I don't know how much time after. The Tur rewrote the Rambam, basically. And what he did was, first of all, he's much, much more elaborate. He has many, many more details than the Rambam has. And second of all, he did not bring any parts of the Rambam that have to do with halachas that apply only when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. There's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no Karbanis, there's no Tum and Tareh. He only brings halachas atzrichas zman laws which are relevant nowadays. So the Rambam has 14 books, and the Torah has 4. Erechayim, Yeredeya, Chesha Mishpat, and Ebenezer, because he only brings halacha tzrichis bisman hazeh. He doesn't bring the whole. He doesn't bring the whole. He's not as broad as the Rambam. The Rambam is called Atei Kula, and the Torah is called Atei Kula, which is again Zman HaGolus, times of Golus. But the Torah also has a bit of a style. When he brings you halacha, he brings you the sources. The Beis Yosef wrote a commentary on the Torah Shulchan Aruch, and all the books of halacha that we have until the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, they all model after the Torah. And I don't think there's a question that the Torah modeled himself after the Rambam. He just changed it. Because before the Rambam and the Torah, every book of halacha was written on the folio of the Gemara, written on the pages of the Gemara. So you should know the reasons for the halachas, because you can find the sources for the halachas in the Gemara. The Rambam restructured halacha. I guess you would say the Torah restructured the Rambam to include only those laws which touch us in times of galus, and every halachic sefer written since, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura and the Kaf HaChaim and the Levushim, they all follow the same design. 4 sections: Erechayim, which speaks about regular life; Yeredeh, which speaks about Issa V'Heter; Chesha Mishpat, which speaks about Jewish business law; and Even Ha'ez, which has to do with marriage, marital aspects, marriage and divorce, and everything that's involved in that. So the elaborate commentary is called Beis Yosef. The law is called Marah, the Shulchan Aruch. So if a person is learning dry Shulchan Aruch, forgive me for saying it, it's boring. The Rebbe uses the word Yerida. Ki im maskanas ha'inyan, all you know is the conclusion, but you know the conclusion, but again, that touches Maisa B'Peh, what you have to do actionably, actually. So the Rebbe says, isn't it ironic that Ubiyachadim Zeh, even though halacha is the level of Torah which reveals the least of the wisdom and the scholarship which is behind the halacha, at the same time halacha is called Taga ve'kisra shel Torah, the crown of the Torah, above the Torah, the crown. Shebei mizgalu meir atzn el Baruch Hu, because in the crown of Torah the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealed. Now how does that work? On the one hand, halacha is the least sophisticated level of Torah, because it just tells you what to do without telling you why and from where. And on the other hand, it's called the highest level of Torah. It's connected to the crown of the Torah. What's the answer? Because when you do it, you anchor it. You make it real and sustained and constant. Nasa. What does it mean in life? Since most people's pleasure is because you're smart. When you study ideas, you want to understand them. You want to engage in a debate and a discussion and a lacking of horns, if you will. Says the Rebbe. Turn the page. One must have in his learning Torah, and that is to learn fixed laws, which reveals the Hashem's will, which is higher than Hashem's wisdom. There's a lot of aspects to this conversation. The first one is that when you study halacha, you have to give up on the pleasure of understanding the Torah. That alone has plenty of nas. And the second one is you have to do what you're told exactly as you're told to do it. And the third one is that when you do what Hashem says exactly, you're accessing His will, Hashem's ratzon, which is higher than a seichel altogether. The way the Eibishter operates is first Hashem wants us to do mitzvahs, then He gave the mitzvahs reason. So higher than the reasons for mitzvahs is the idea that we do what Hashem says because He told us to do it. So the lowest level of Torah is also the highest level of Torah. Because the lowest level of Torah has in itself the maximum nasa, therefore it's connected to the highest level of Torah, which is the shleimus of nasa. Bottom line, you got to learn to know halacha. Knowing and learning halacha is extremely important. You can't be frum without learning halacha. You must learn halacha.
After the Rebbe said that more people should learn halacha and they should learn it more in the yeshivas, what they did it? It was now included?
Well, some listen, some in Chabad yeshivas we always had a seder of halacha. but it's also not enough. I mean, that's why the Rebbe wanted us to get smicha. The Rebbe didn't want us to get smicha to have a piece of paper. The Rebbe wants to get smicha so we should know what a shaila is. The Rebbe didn't say get smicha so you should be able to get married for some mystical reason. You have to know you have to know the base. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch's big. And if you get smicha today, it's a joke. It's a few little tiny sections of the Shulchan Aruch. But at least you have an idea of Isavaheta a little bit about kosher and treif, shailas that come up. You know.
And the benefit is that then you know more, like you know halacha, and then
You know what to do. You know what to do. I'm going to say one point. I have a lot of things in my head that are bouncing around, and the billiard balls are banging into each other and canceling each other out. I'm just going to say one thing, then we'll pause, we'll come back, and we'll try to learn a part of the next year. We are in a rush. I mean, this is our last week. Next, we had the next Elul. When I come back, I'm going to start Baruch Hashem. The second part of Baruch Hashem, we divided up into 3 subgroups, will be the second group. Learning Baruch Hashem according to the Rishonim, with Hashem's help. And the most important thing, I had to be prepared. And that's a job. It's a lot. It's an awful lot. There's a volume of Chassidus which is called Samach Vov. It's very, very famous. You probably have heard of the Samach Vov. It's one of the most famous volumes of Chassidus. It's massive. The newer prints of Samach Vov, which have notes, it's probably 800 pages. It's a gigantic essay of the Rebbe Rashab of Chassidus. It's a series of Maimorim that were said over more than 2 years that are a serial. They follow each other in sequence. But the Rebbe Rashab actually completed. He finished it. A lot of the Rebbe Rashab serial Maimorim don't finish, but this one it does finish. And the Samach Vov has a very crisp purpose. If you study the Samach Vov, the Samach Vov is making a very, very crisp point. The Samach Vov talks about Torah and mitzvahs and the Shamas Yisrael. It's 3 separate ideas. The meaning of Torah mystically and Kabbalistically, the meaning of mitzvahs mystically and Kabbalistically, the meaning of Yidden mystically and Kabbalistically. The last section, the last 100 pages and more of the Samach Vov talk about Neshamas Yisrael. But until then, the Rebbe Rashab is juxtaposing, he's comparing and contrasting Torah to mitzvahs. And this goes on in the old print for 450 pages. In the new print, it's probably 600 pages. And there's a fundamental question. It's a philosophical question. Who was closer to God? A Jew who's like a son to God, or a Jew who's like a servant to God? Ben or Eved? The Samach Vov revolves around that question. And that's the same question as which is better, Torah or mitzvahs. If you're a Ben, it's Torah. If you're an Eved, it's mitzvahs. And the Rebbe Rashab asks this question, and he goes over it several times, and he gives different explanations, and at the very, very end, he actually changes his mind of that discussion. Ben or Eved, which is greater, a son or a slave? And of course the answer is a son is defined by his similarity to his father in personality and his closeness to his father in thinking and feeling. A slave is defined by his distance from his master and his ability just to do what his master says. And his ability to do what his master says without having to understand is so deep that when he does something, the master gets the credit for it as if the master did it, as if the slave isn't even there. So for much of the Samach Vov, the Rebbe asks the question Ben versus Eved, and his answer is Eved. Mitzvahs, in other words. Serving Hashem as a slave, serving Hashem with a bitl and a Kabbalah is the most ideal life of serving Hashem, because you're putting aside yourself for the Eibishter, so the Eibishter is filling your space, so you're maximally close to the Eibishter, as the philosophy explains it in fancy, which I'm not going to go into. At the very end of that conversation, the Rebbe Rashab changes his mind. And he writes, V'hine yesh bein shu negam kein eved. There is a son who's also a slave. There's one who is close to the Eibishter, and he also has the mile of being far. What is that? You're listening? When a rabbi paskins a halach, for those who don't know, and I really hope you do know, learning Torah is very, very rewarding. It's very satisfying, it's very pleasurable, it's very beautiful, it's very interesting, it's very deep, it's very intellectual, full of surprises, and there's always more. Because when you study Torah, you enjoy it, your ego is involved. Because your ego is involved, you never trust yourself. Maybe I'm making a mistake.
Say that again.
Because you enjoy it, your ego was involved. Now, because your ego is involved, you can't know if you're understanding it correctly. There's one exception. When somebody comes to you and says, Rabbi, I have a shaila. Kosher or not kosher? Allowed or not allowed? When your girls will get married, you'll know what Rabbanim are for. Rabbanim are asked questions that are, are here on this side or on this side of Kodesh. And it's the job of the Rav to say kosher or not kosher. That's his job. There's no pleasure in that at all. There's pleasure in saying to you, go ask another rabbi. But that's his job. There's a story with the Rebbe Rashab that Yankel Lander wrote to the Rebbe, that he was the Rav in the house. Yankel Lander was the rabbi in the Rebbe's home, Rebbe Rashab's home. And the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe Rashab's wife, had a shaila on a chicken. There was a chicken with a broken leg. So she walked into she was looking for Rabbi Landau. He was the rabbi, but he wasn't available. We couldn't find him. So she walked into her husband to ask her husband if it's kosher or not. She walked into her husband. The Rebbe Rashab was talking to Yankel Landau. Now Yankel Landau was such a chosr with the Rebbe Rashab. He had such respect for him. He wouldn't open his mouth in his presence. And she walks up to her husband. Look, the chicken has a broken leg. Is it kosher or not kosher? So the Rebbe Rashab, with a smile on his face, turns to Yankel Landau and says, you're the Rav, you have to paskin. To paskin in front of your Rebbe is not allowed to be halacha, but the Rebbe is telling him to. So he muttered under his breath, Memega says, it's allowed to be eaten. And the Rebbe Rashab said, Zog, say. The Rebbe wanted him to say kosher. Don't say it's allowed, say kosher. Because the words of a Rav have a koyach HaTorah. There's no pleasure in that. There's pleasure in learning Gemara. This pleasure pursuing the lumdus of the halacha until someone is actually going to make a decision on that basis. And your decision is going to determine, and if you make chas v'shalom a mistake, it could be dvarim ha'em, it could be a mabel, it's called. It could be terrible. So the Rebbe Rashab says when a Rav is paskening a shaila, he's learning the Torah, and he's not enjoying it. He's afraid of making a mistake. So then his learning has bittul and Kabbalah sale. You understand? This is what the Rebbe is saying here. When you're learning halacha, you're going away from the delight of Torah, and you're engaging in the nasa of Torah. Even if you have to pursue the law by studying it and figuring it out until you can paskin the halacha, this is nasa v'nishma. You're not enjoying it. You're learning Torah because the Eibishter said. So in Yiddishkeit, in Torah, nasa v'nishma of Torah is to learn halacha first. Questions or comments? Go ahead.
But isn't there ego when someone comes up to you and you're like, oh, isn't such and such kosher, or isn't this and that? You know what I'm saying? You definitely can have ego there, and you definitely can have pleasure in giving and like helping another yid.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I could be wrong.
If you know it's kosher, you can say it's kosher. But if you're the guy or the gal who has to open up the books and look inside and say, it says this here, it says this here, it says this here, this makes it not good, this makes it yes good, and you have to weigh one against this, you don't know how to Rabbanan paskin. You don't want to know how to Rabbanan paskin, trust me.
Oh, so you're not saying to share halacha with other people?
No, to paskin halacha.
Oh, fine, I understand, thank you.
The Rav is afraid. Someone told me a story about Moshe Feinstein, and I wish I could remember who. A Lubavitcher younger man went into the Moshe to get smicha many, many years ago. The Moshe Feinstein's gone 40 years almost. And the Moshe says, I have a shaila on my table. You listening? The Moshe Feinstein was a Litvak. And I fasted for 3 days. Fasted for 3 days to paskin one halacha. Who ever heard that the Moshe Feinstein fasted for paskin halacha? He was a master. You ever read his writings? He knows the title. You know how many fingers you have. He writes like a Rishon. His bekiyas, his proficiency in Kol HaTorah Kula is like Mamish Chad Mekadma. He plays with the Babli and the Yerushalmi and the Poskim like Lego. He's such a master. I fasted for 3 days to Paskin Halacha. Think about that. You know, the Moshe, my grandfather, it was like my grandfather was born in America. He was born in 1918. So if he'd be alive today, he'd be, I don't know what, 107 years old. My Zaidi told me that the Moshe in Russia was not a Rav, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. When he came to this country, he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Tiferet Yerushalayim. He was Rosh Yeshiva. His first Svarim are not called Dibrei Smosh, they're not called Igrei Smosh, they're called Dibrei Smosh. He wrote Svarim of Lomdis. He was a big Talmud Chacham. And he was a Goan, he wrote Svarim. He became a Rav for one reason. There was nobody else who had the boldest, the Pascha, the Shas who were facing him. He became a rabbi because of a vacuum. So my Zaidi told me there was an old Gaon in New York who was a real Gaon from the Friedrich days, Yankov Safsel, who was a very, very big Gaon. And him and the Moshe once had an argument about halacha, and he said to the Moshe, the Veisach, the Besnish Kerov. Moshe, you're not a Rav, you're a Rosh Yeshiva. He was the biggest Pesach of our time. He tells me, you're not a Rav, you're a Rosh Yeshiva. Because his background was a Rosh Yeshiva. He went away from being a Rosh Yeshiva. He was always a Rosh Yeshiva. He never stopped being a Rosh Yeshiva, but he became a Meilei Rav for the whole generation. Even Eretz Yisrael, America for sure, but even Yisrael leaned on the Moshe Feinstein. And being a Rosh Yeshiva is a lot of fun. Being a Rav, not so much. That's Nasa v'Nishma and Teira. What's the Nasa? You go away from what's fun to what you need to do.